My daughter-in-law told me I was just a guest in her house. My son said, "Mom, stop interfering in my marriage." So I showed them whose name was on the papers. That sentence did not come out of nowhere. It was born from humiliation, from silence, from the slow death of respect. I still remember that evening. The sunlight was fading through the curtains I had, stitched with my own hands 20 years ago. The same house, the same walls, the same dining table where I fed my son mashed bananas when he had no teeth. And yet, suddenly I was a guest. She said it casually, almost politely. "Mrs. Carter, with all due respect, this is our home now. You can't just walk into our room whenever you want. Our home." I smiled gently. I was bringing tea. My son didn't look at me. Instead, he sighed in irritation. "Mom, please, stop interfering in my marriage. We need space. Space." I carried him for 9 months. I buried my husband alone. I worked 2 jobs to pay off half this mortgage. And now I needed permission. I nodded slowly. Of course, I understand. I have learned something about people. When they think you're weak, they become careless. That night, I heard them laughing upstairs, planning renovations, talking about their future. She said, "Once everything is legally transferred, we can redesign the whole place." Transferred. My fingers tightened around my teacup. You see, they believed something that wasn't true. Yes, I let Daniel handle the payments these last 3 years. Yes, I stepped back from daily decisions. But the original property deed, the foundation documents, the controlling shares of his company, still mine. Every single one. I never transferred ownership after my husband died. Not fully. Because something inside me always whispered, "Don't." And that whisper saved me. The next morning at breakfast, she repeated it, this time sharper. "You know, it might be healthier if you spent more time elsewhere. It's difficult building a marriage when a mother is always around." Daniel finally looked at me, not with love, with annoyance. "Mom, just give us space." I looked at both of them, young, confident, certain they had already won. I stood up calmly. "I will give you space," I said softly. Then I walked to my bedroom, opened the locked drawer, took out the leather folder, and smiled. Because tonight, they were going to learn something very important. Guests don't hold original property deeds. And mothers, don't forget signatures. I did not confront them. Not yet. Revenge, when served too quickly, loses its flavor. That morning, I behaved exactly the way they expected me to behave. Quiet, old, harmless. I even apologized. "I'm sorry if I've been overstepping," I said gently while pouring Daniel his coffee. He didn't notice the steadiness in my hands. My daughter-in-law smiled sweetly. Too sweetly. "We just want a healthy boundary." Healthy. That word tasted bitter. After breakfast, Daniel left for work. She stayed behind, scrolling on her phone, pretending I no longer existed. Good. The less they watched me, the better. I changed into my navy coat, the one I wore to my husband's funeral, and walked out without saying a word. But I wasn't going to Aunt Clara's. I was going somewhere far more interesting. Mr. Hathaway's office. He had been our family lawyer for 28 years. He knew every document my late husband ever signed. When I entered, he looked surprised. "Mrs. Carter, it's been a while." I smiled. "I believe it's time to review my assets." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Is there a problem?" "Oh no," I said calmly. "Just clarity." He pulled out the files, the property deed, the trust structure, the controlling shares of Daniel's company, the ones I had quietly kept in my name when we restructured after my husband died. Mr. Hathaway adjusted his glasses. "Technically speaking, everything still answers to you." I knew, but hearing it out loud felt powerful. And if I wished, I asked slowly, to remove certain individuals from future inheritance. He leaned back in his chair. That is entirely within your legal rights. I nodded. Prepare new documents. He studied my face carefully. Are you sure? I thought of Daniel's voice. Stop interfering in my marriage. I thought of her voice. You're just a guest. Yes, I replied calmly. I'm very sure. For 2 hours, we worked. We updated beneficiaries. We created a revocable trust with very specific conditions. We placed the house under a protective clause. No sale without my written approval. No transfer. No refinancing. Nothing. And then I added one more detail. If I were ever forced to leave my home under emotional pressure, manipulation, or coercion, the property would automatically be donated to a housing foundation. Not to Daniel. Not to her. To strangers. Mr. Hathaway looked impressed. That's strategic. I smiled faintly. I raised my son. I know exactly how he reacts to consequences. When I returned home that afternoon, they were sitting together on the couch, laughing, planning. She looked up at me. Oh, you're back. Back. As if I had been visiting. I placed my purse down carefully. Yes, I said softly. I'm home. They didn't notice anything different. Not yet, but they would. Because tomorrow evening, Daniel had scheduled a meeting with a real estate agent to discuss ownership transfer, and I had every intention of attending that meeting, uninvited. The next evening, I walked into the real estate office without telling them. Daniel and his wife were already seated, looking confident, proud, like the house was theirs to claim. I let them bask in that false sense of victory for a few seconds. Mom, what? What are you doing here? Daniel stammered, clearly unsettled. I smiled, calmly unfolding the leather folder on the table. Just checking some details, I said softly. His wife laughed nervously. Well, you know, we just wanted to finalize things. We didn't think you'd finalize. I cut her off, my voice low but sharp. I thought you were my guests. Their laughter faltered. I opened the folder and slid the first set of documents toward them. The property deed, the updated trust, the clauses restricting sale, transfer, or refinancing without my signature. Daniel froze. His eyes flicked between the papers and me, disbelief growing with every second. I don't understand, he whispered. Of course you don't, I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. Because you believed I was just a guest in my own home. But I never transferred ownership. Everything here, legally, answers to me. His wife's face turned pale. Why you can't do that? She blurted. Oh, I can, I said softly. And I did. I flipped through the next papers. The clauses I added. The protective measures. The conditional donation if anyone tried to force me out. Daniel's voice cracked. Mom, we just wanted to. You wanted control. I finished for him. I wanted respect. Two very different things. They both looked at me like they were seeing a stranger. A stranger who had been living in their home, silent, unnoticed, and suddenly untouchable. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the silence. Consider this a lesson, I whispered. Yes, don't hold deeds. Mothers never forget signatures. His wife swallowed hard. I didn't mean. Words, I interrupted, are cheap. Actions, they matter. And I've acted. Very quietly. Very legally. And now, the house, the business shares, everything is protected. Under my name. Daniel looked down, ashamed. I never thought. You didn't, I said softly. And that's why it's effective. Never underestimate a woman who has survived everything life threw at her. I stood up slowly, folding my folder with care. Now, I said gently, you may continue planning your future. But remember, this future is only possible with my consent. I left the office without another word. And outside, I let myself smile. Because the first wave of fear had already washed over them. The next wave would be far more powerful. Tomorrow, I would begin controlling every step they thought they owned, and they would never see me as a guest again. The next morning, I returned home, walking through the front door as if nothing had happened. Daniel and his wife were in the kitchen, chatting, laughing, pretending everything was normal. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat down at the dining table, casually opening my laptop. They didn't notice, not yet. I let them believe the house still belonged to them. Let them feel safe. Small things first. Subtle reminders. Psychological pressure. The mortgage bill arrived in the mail. I had already updated the payment settings. My signature was required. Later, Daniel asked me, "Mom, could you pay the electricity bill? I didn't have time this month." I smiled sweetly, slowly. "Oh, I'm sorry, dear. I can't. The account now requires my approval, and I'm reviewing it before releasing any payment." He froze. His wife's eyes widened. "But that's the electricity," she stammered. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm very particular about numbers." Dinner came. I quietly rearranged the kitchen schedules, limiting their access to the pantry I had stocked for them. A week passed, and they still thought I was being considerate, old, and gentle. But every small restriction I implemented reminded them. The house, the company, the bills, everything still depended on me. Then, the next day, I attended a meeting I wasn't invited to. Daniel had arranged for an interior designer to discuss renovations. I arrived quietly, observing the plans, nodding. When they realized I was there, the designer hesitated, nervous. Daniel's wife said, "Mom, we didn't expect you here." "I like to be informed," I said gently. That day, I made minor objections. Placement of walls, changes in wiring, new furniture. Nothing huge, but enough to slow them down. Enough to remind them that even in their home, my presence and authority mattered. Each day after, I continued small, invisible interventions, approvals delayed, reminders of my ownership, subtle legal mentions during casual conversations. They didn't scream. They didn't argue, but the tension grew. Every night, I watched them quietly. The fear was there. It was subtle at first, flickering in their eyes, then growing. It was the kind of fear that never needs words. Because when someone thinks they have power, only to realize the opposite is true, the fear burns silently, deeply. And I was no longer just their guest. I was the woman who controlled everything. Days passed, and the household had changed without a single word from me. Daniel now paused before speaking. His wife hesitated at every decision. The laughter that once echoed through these walls was gone, replaced by quiet tension, the kind that settles when someone realizes they are not as untouchable as they thought. One afternoon, as I sat in the living room reading a legal update, Daniel approached cautiously. "Mom, I think we need to talk about the house, about the bills, the trust." I looked up slowly, my eyes calm, unshaken. "Talk," I said gently. "Why talk when everything is already clear?" His voice faltered. I didn't know you'd." "You didn't know," I repeated, "because you assumed I was weak. You assumed I would let you take control. But assumptions are dangerous." He looked down. I could see the weight of realization pressing on him. His wife, standing by the doorway, looked pale. We didn't think." I smiled faintly, sipping my tea. "Thoughts matter little. Actions matter everything. And you have learned, slowly, that the house, the accounts, the company, all answer to me." A quiet moment passed. Their silence spoke louder than any argument could. And then I leaned slightly forward, softening my voice, almost confidingly. "Sometimes life teaches lessons in subtle ways. It's like a story unfolding. Each choice, each betrayal, each revelation matters. And if you want to see how far someone can go when they are underestimated," I paused, letting my words linger, "then you might enjoy listening to other stories like mine. Stories of cunning, of patience, of quiet revenge. Little lessons hidden in life's twists. Subscribe, and you'll hear them all. Their eyes widened slightly. They didn't understand yet the subscription I mentioned wasn't for them, but for those watching, learning from my story. I leaned back, smiling, calm, collected, untouchable. That evening, I walked through the house, observing every little change. The way they glanced at me now, the hesitation in their voices, the silence in rooms that once rang with laughter. It was satisfying. Every move I had made, every clause I had written, every small intervention was working perfectly. They believed they were planning their life, but I was quietly, cleverly planning mine and theirs. Because they had forgotten one thing. Even a guest can become the most powerful presence if she remembers who truly holds the keys. It didn't take long for the cracks to appear. Daniel had started avoiding eye contact, speaking only when necessary, stumbling over words as if the walls themselves were judging him. His wife, once so confident and controlling, now moved around the house carefully, as if stepping on thin ice. One evening, I was in the kitchen, casually arranging the dishes, when Daniel entered, his face pale. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, voice tight. I looked up slowly, my expression calm, neutral. "About what?" "About all this. The house, the trust. I didn't realize you would do this." I smiled faintly, gently. "Do you mean you didn't realize I would protect what is mine?" He swallowed. His shoulders slumped. I thought I was ready. I thought we could manage without you stepping in. "Manage?" I asked softly. "Manage a home, a life, without thinking of consequences." He looked down, ashamed. I feel guilty." "Guilt is good," I said quietly. "It teaches lessons. I hope it teaches you respect." Before he could respond, his wife interjected sharply. You've ruined everything. You're controlling. You've trapped us." I raised an eyebrow. "Trapped?" "No, I've only reminded you that actions have consequences, that boundaries matter, that ownership is more than a word, it's responsibility." Her hands trembled slightly. I can't believe you would do this. You're cruel." I leaned back calmly. "Not cruel, just wise. And sometimes, wisdom is mistaken for cruelty when it interferes with selfish plans." Daniel opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. I could see the conflict in his eyes, a mix of fear, shame, and grudging respect. His wife, growing angrier, stormed to the living room. "You can't control everything." I followed her calmly, my voice soft, deliberate. "Control? No, I simply ensured fairness. You forgot one important rule. Respect the past before claiming the future." She froze, realizing I wasn't bluffing. Every clause, every restriction, every document I had quietly secured was binding. She could scream, she could plot, but legally she had no leverage. Daniel finally muttered, almost inaudibly, "Mom, we never thought." I held his gaze. "You never thought because you assumed I was weak. And assumptions can be expensive." They were both silent, the tension so thick I could almost touch it. And I, sitting calmly, sipping my tea, let them stew in their realization. They had underestimated me. They had mocked me. They had called me a guest. And now, slowly, they were understanding that in this house, in this life, I held the ultimate power. The fear, the regret, the frustration, it was all perfectly timed. The storm had begun, and tomorrow would bring the final confrontation. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else. The house was quiet to quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes a revelation. I prepared my documents one last time, each page precise, every clause binding, every signature mine. When Daniel came down, he found me sitting at the dining table, calmly sipping my tea, the leather folder open before me. "Mom, please," he started, his voice trembling. We never intended to disrespect you. I looked up slowly, letting the words sink in. Intended. Intentions don't undo actions. His wife appeared behind him, pale, tense. You can't do this. We thought we had. I held up a hand, gently. Thought is not reality. Assumption is not law. And disrespect is never forgotten. I slid the folder toward them. Everything you believed you had, legally, financially, belongs to me. The house, the business shares, even the accounts you felt were under your control. Daniel's eyes widened. He swallowed hard. Mom, we didn't know. No, I said softly, you didn't know. And now you do. I leaned back, calm and collected. You laughed when I was called a guest. You rolled your eyes when I offered advice. You thought I was weak, old, irrelevant. They were silent now. Fear mingled with shame in their expressions. I am none of those things, I continued. I am a mother, a widow who built a life from nothing, a woman who survived betrayal and learned that patience, intelligence, and careful planning are more powerful than anger. I stood and walked slowly around the room, letting my presence dominate the space. You see, power is not in yelling. Power is not in arrogance. Power is in knowing the truth and having the courage to act on it quietly, strategically, with precision. I watched them crumble slowly. Their confidence shattered. The house, the money, the life they thought they could manipulate, all firmly under my control. Remember this, I said softly, almost kindly. A mother's love is fierce, but her patience is cunning. Underestimate either at your peril. Daniel's wife sank into the sofa, silent, stunned. Daniel simply nodded, the weight of reality pressing on him. I smiled faintly, folding the folder, calm, untouchable, victorious. And as I walked toward the window, looking out at the house I had built, the life I had protected, I whispered to myself, until next time. See you in the next video.